Okay, in the last video we imported an image of Tony Hawk here into Photoshop and then started using the pen tool to isolate the edge that defines his face. Now the next step is going to be to close this path. Whoa, pardon me. The next step will be to close this path, and we have a little more tweaking to do, and then once he is isolated we'll copy just his head onto a new layer because I don't want to make you watch me isolate that entire body. So here I'm using the pen tool to select an option. Let me turn on the keycaster for you. If I hold down the command key, I can use the white arrow, or I can select the white arrow over here in the toolbar. And so we'll come through here and add points when they're necessary. Pardon me, we'll move points around when that's required. And just try to get a slightly more refined depiction of his hair. Okay, great. So now we come back around down to the neck. If I click right here on this open point, then I can click all the way over here and then close the selection off. Just like before, we might add a couple more points just to make sure that everything is looking correct. Okay, hit Z and then zoom back out, pan that around, and we're ready to make a selection. So first things first, I head back to any vector-based tool, for example, the pen or the white or black arrow. Now I right-click, and I want to make sure that my background is active too. I mean, there's no other layer that can be active, but it's good practice. So I right-click and say Make Selection. I have an opportunity to set a feathering radius and also to anti-alias the selection. So both of those things will soften that edge. If you do it too much, you get a really weird, ghostly, Photoshop-y looking thing. So maybe I'll do 1 pixel, or maybe it'll be winding up with a 0. So I hit OK, and you'll see that now our vector has converted into what's known as marching ants. That's the actual term for what we're looking at. And marching ants tells us that we're no longer in the resolution independent zone of the vector. Now we're actually selecting the literal pixels that make up this image. So now I can just simply on my keyboard copy and paste. So on the Mac that's going to be Command C and Command V, and you'll see by default whenever there's pixels in the clipboard it automatically pastes into a new layer. So here I can hide the background, and I can see that we've just selected out the skater's face. You can sort of see that kind of ghostly thing I was talking about. This isn't the highest quality image, so 1 pixel is actually pretty big. So 1 pixel feathering radius didn't look too great. But the cool thing here is it's easy to do over, so I'll just delete layer 1 by dragging into the trash can. Head over to my Paths tab, and I'll click here on Work Path to reload it. And if you see here, now I've got that vector back that I was working with before. If you can't see it very well, I can switch to the black arrow and click on it, and there's those anchor points we were working on. Another good piece of housekeeping is you always want to rename the work path something else, like Skaterhead. Anytime it's called work path, that means if I start a new path, it can accidentally delete the old one and just knock it right out of the system. So I'll go ahead and rename that. So back to layers, make sure I'm on a vector-based tool like the black arrow, right-click, make selection, this time feathering radius 0, but I'll go ahead and anti-alias it. That'll soften the edge just slightly. Copy, paste, hide the background, and that time you can see we've got a slightly more gnarly edge, but I think it looks better than that sort of overly soft edge. Okay, so the last steps in terms of preparing our isolation for other people to use is to crop the image down. So I'll hit C for crop, and then I'll just drag myself a little box here. You can see if the box is artificially constrained to certain proportions, you can just hit clear up here at the top, and then you can make whatever size you want. Okay, so I want to get nice and tight just with a little bit of margin, and then I'll hit enter. Okay, so that deletes all of the other parts of the image component that I'm not using. And then finally down here in layers, there's this little button that's like a circle that's half white and half black. If I click on it and then go to solid color, I'll have the opportunity to muck about and to produce some kind of high contrast background color. Now initially it'll seem like I've accidentally just deleted all of my hard work, but that's only because the color landed up here above layer 1 in the layer hierarchy. So I can just drag that down and then that reveals my isolation. Now, the reason it's a good idea to make a bright background color is now I can see all the places where I've made mistakes. So for example, down here on the neck, I picked up a piece of the shirt. The nose is a little hazy, and the top of the helmet, for example. So let's talk about how we would fix that. Again, I'll delete my selected layer, hide my color, and show my background. Zoom in a little bit, or quite a bit actually. Go back to paths and then load that path. And you can see here my path is a little bit too proud, and that's why I'm including some of those blue pixels in the selection. So what I can do to fix that is grab my white arrow, and then, yeah, so sure enough, my anchors are really far apart here. I'll use the pen, add an anchor, and then white arrow it until it's a little tighter in on the helmet. So sometimes when you do this, you're going to lose a couple extra pixels. You can see right here that's going to get lost, but that's actually going to make for a better image, so I don't mind that at all. Let's come down here and make the nose a little bit less bulbous, right? So we lose some of those pixels right off the bat. And I'm getting some kind of funky, I think that was just a screen updating issue, so don't pay any attention to that. You can move these lips in a different direction, move around the location of the anchor, and so on. And I think we also said we were going to improve the neck next to the shirt. So white arrow, find that pixel. You gotta have real good aim, right? And move it around. Okay, cool. So of course, this is a do as I say and not as I do situation, as it so often is. I just did a kind of basic pass here, but of course I expect your work to be much more detail-oriented. So I'll right-click, make selection, no feathering radius because we determined we don't prefer it. Back to layers. You see here how color fill is blue. This would not work, copy and paste that is, unless I hit background as the active layer. So background, copy, paste. Show the color fill, drag it behind layer 1, and you can see now we've addressed that white fringing here, but not here. The nose definitely looks better, the neck looks better, and they'll improve as I zoom out a little bit because this image isn't nice enough to endure that kind of close analysis.